Good morning. My name is Doug Johanson. I am the Director of Facilities for St. Alexius Medical Center in Bismarck, North Dakota. I'd like to give you a brief introduction to our hospital and kind of the environment that we're working in now in North Dakota. If you've heard what's going on in North Dakota, if you haven't, I'll give you a little introduction to what's happening. Here's our front door. We were established 1885. We were a hospital in North Dakota before North Dakota was a state. So when they were a territory, St. A's was formed. So we've been here longer than the state has. I tried telling that to the state. But we're a Catholic hospital. The sisters sponsor us. They're in town, so we have a lot to do with the sisters yet. They haven't quite left the scene, but they're getting there. So the reins are being handed over to us. Okay. Here's the area that we cover in North Dakota. Actually goes a little bit farther than this. We actually go into Montana somewhat, South Dakota, some into Canada, a little bit into Minnesota. So you can see the area that we're talking about. Okay. If you've seen the news in the last few years about North Dakota and the oil boom, what we have going on is, you can see here, the number of permits for family dwellings. Our unemployment rate, I think, is at about 2.5%. If you want a job, you can get one in North Dakota quite easily. Every corner has a help wanted sign. Every paper used to be about a half a page. It's more like 4 to 5 pages of open positions. So we have an issue with picking up skilled labor, needless to say. Capital budget planning that we try to go through, we had chaos before we even started TOC. We had chaos just like everybody else I've heard from the last few days with our process. We'd sit in the meetings, we'd sit with the contractors, we'd sit with our engineering team, we'd sit with our management team, but we had very little clear concept of where we were headed. What's the right project to do next? How many can we do? None of those answers were available. They just got thrown at us kind of on, I don't know, random basis, personal preference, who yelled the loudest. This is what we got. So, some of the projects we've been going through, you can see the stuff where we have a tradition at St. A's, we hardly ever stop renovation. We always have 4 or 5 projects going on at any one time. Generally around $12 to $20 million a year, in that range, depending on if we're putting up new buildings or not. Did we skip a slide? We missed something here.
Yeah, I think we just transitioned.
We have a gap. This is the end of my piece, other than I wanted to add something about the contractors and my personnel for the I'm the director of facilities. We're having a real difficult time getting staff. We've been running at about 75% staff levels for the last 2.5 years because I can't increase wages quick enough to keep up with the oil field. You can be an oil field worker, make $25 to $30 an hour and know absolutely nothing. If you can run a shovel, you can do that. You can go out there, be a truck driver. If you have your license as a semi-driver, head up to Williston, North Dakota. You can get a job, make about $100,000 a year as a truck driver, doing nothing but hauling water back and forth for the fracking process and for all of that. So we're struggling to try to get help. These guys are part of the construction process, so it kind of ties into the TOC. So we're really short on resources. And don't go out and try to grab another contractor. They're facing the same thing. We get the same issue. Okay, I'm going to turn it over to Jill. I'm going to give Hilbert my mic.
So, of course, we need to talk about why to change. We knew that we needed to change, but we needed to kind of break it out into why we needed to change so that we understood that. Then we needed to talk about what to change, and of course, what to change to. Then I'm going to hand it over to Hilbert, and he's going to talk about how to cause the change and how to create a process of ongoing improvement. So why change? We're having a lot of problems, as Doug mentioned. We're getting a very bad reputation in our department, our engineering department. Our projects were not completed on time. We'd have new doctors coming. They needed a place to see their patients. They were not completed on time. We also have a capital projects budget that needed to be completed. And it was very, very strict and rigorous as to what projects were in there. It was based on the budget every year. And once it was set, there was little to no changing it. What to change? We needed to change a lot of processes. We needed to change the process of projects incoming through the design of that project and also through the construction phase. We had problems with our contractors. We had no set schedule for them, which projects they should be working on. We always have many projects occurring at any given time. So the contractors were kind of bouncing around from project to project, working on whichever projects they liked to work on, which were the easiest. So we needed some accountability with our contractors. Also down in our engineering and architecture phase before construction, we've had the same engineers and architects for a long time. We've had the same contractors for a long time. They kind of understand where they need to go and what they need to do. And so a lot of times our engineers and architects were not giving very complete drawings or assumed that the contractors knew what they needed to do. So what we need to change too, new processes. We need to get a front door for our projects because, as Doug mentioned, who screams the loudest, I'm sure nobody's ever heard that every project is #1 priority, right? We never hear that at our place. So we need to figure out a front door so the projects weren't jumping in throughout the process. We needed to set a new process for accepting and approving the scope and design. Instead of just one person saying, this is a project we need to complete, get it going, it's #1 priority. We needed to have a little more understanding throughout the facility of why that project was important and when the right time to start it was. So again, we needed to decide when to start them and then work with our contractors on helping them understand the priorities of our projects, what was important to work on today, and how that would in turn benefit all of our projects that we were working on. So.
Thanks, Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Well, they say you shouldn't apologize because it's a sign of weakness. I wish I had enough time to go through a lot of the how we did this implementation. I'll touch on some highlights and hopefully leave some time at the end for questions. How we got involved with St. Alexius in the first place is probably an important question to this audience. NOVACES was there doing a Lean Six Sigma engagement, and Doug was in the training, this Greenbelt training, and said, you know, I like this stuff, but doing construction work seems a little different from what you seem to be talking about here. Do you have something for me? I believe was the question. And so you can kind of fill in the blank, and later on we started doing an implementation of critical chain. But the problem he posed initially when we started talking was, how do I organize my capital budgeting process? So we started with that question and ended up with critical chain. Oh, wrong direction. There was an event where we did a presentation and demonstration, and then we did a workshop with the contractors, because the first question was, you saw the small team that Doug has. All the work is contracted out, and you probably know that when we're doing critical chain implementation, we've got to get to the people actually doing the work and managing the day-to-day work. So should we even go there? This is a big question for me, because when I entered the community, there was a lot of emphasis at the time about not trying to apply TOC or CCPM where it doesn't fit. I never quite followed those advice even back then, and we didn't follow it this time either. Didn't always work out pretty, by the way, but I'm still here, so. We did have a workshop with the contractors. They gave us some recommendations and some estimation of how much better they thought St. Alexius could be if we were to implement some of their ideas. So the first thing we did was ask them for what they thought we should do differently. We didn't start out by saying, we want you to do CCPM. List of recommendations, very straightforward stuff you would expect. And they told, and this is kind of interesting because in terms of the hesitation I hinted at about should we do this and will the contractors go along, the doubt was more on the part of certain senior executives at the hospital as to whether their contractors are of the type that would cooperate. And so I said, let's ask them, and that was the background for having the workshop and inviting them. And so the questions we asked the contractor included, of every dollar you collect from St. Alexius, how much of it do you think they're just throwing away? And the VP is standing there. The answer from the contractors is about 20 to 40% of every check you write me is total waste. So by the end of that workshop, we had general consensus that the contractors are not the problem. Even they agree that we could stand to be a little better. There were some key implementation decisions. If you know about implementing critical chain, you might recognize the question about should we follow the S&T tree process with the first step saying freeze the work that's in progress, then accelerate. So that was one of the questions we had to discuss. The other option, generally speaking, is do you create a pipeline model first, theoretically, and then use that to convince people to move towards the necessity for freezing. Other question was how to apply buffer. Buffer-based priorities to contracted workforce. Well, for one thing, there's the question of should we give them access, and is the hospital going to pay for the access of the contractors? How are we going to do optimum resource assignment? And you might not appreciate the problem, so let me explain to you. These contracts were project-specific and trade-specific within the project. The hospital was signing contracts with these various resource pools, I'll call them. And when we're doing optimum resource assignment, you understand we're expecting to move the resources in real time to wherever they're actually needed. Contracts or no contracts. Understand, appreciate the challenge? Okay. Should we include the pre-construction, the engineering phase as part of this implementation, yes or no? Those were questions we were facing. We decided to create the pipeline model first for some specific circumstances, and if I have a chance, I'll come back and tell you why. Here's some general things that were going on. And one of the things that I believed what Doug told me when he said, certain projects are almost done anyway, we can ignore those. We decided to start by providing limited access to some contractors, and I think the intention now is to increase that access. By the way, the response from the contractors were they loved it. Surprised even me the extent to which they were happy to have that access. There are some contracting things we're doing as well that are different, and we decided to create a separate pipeline for the engineering work as a pre-stage to the construction work. I'm going to skip over this. There were some problems with the engineering work. We still haven't gotten our arms around that. We really should look at it some more. I think by now Doug is a little convinced that we should go back and take care of some unfinished work. But we believe in process of ongoing improvement, right? One of the things that is a recurring theme with St. Alexius has to do with saying no to projects. Anybody else have that problem? Okay. The explanations, though, are the ones that are what I found somewhat funny. We have no choice, or I'm just a nice guy. There's no difference between those two, right, when you come right down to it. Okay. So one of the messages I'm trying to communicate back to the leadership team is that we understand good intentions, but good intentions by themselves does not excuse doing the wrong thing. That's kind of a tough message. There are not very many nice ways to say that. In a nice way, I was invited to leave the room, but then there was a smile that says, okay, you can stay for now. And this was just there as a little icon to say, this is a stack of open requests that have not yet been processed or completed. What we're attempting to do is to replace that with a more better understood process. And I wanted to have this no button from Staples. It's this button, when you push it, it says no in like 10 different ways. Niet. Doug has this on his desk, courtesy of Jill. One of the things we had to do here is there was no formal process for saying no. There was no executive level team that had the responsibility to actually say no. So we, among ourselves, created a charter for a project advisory committee of vice presidents. And we crafted a little message and we invited them to a presentation. And we walked them through the presentation. And then we turned it over to them and said, congratulations, you're the project advisory committee. Your next meeting is a month from now. The process we just went through is what you're going to use to approve and deny projects in the future. You can pay me later. They did have a good sense of humor, by the way. So let me go. I feel obligated to touch on some of the actual critical chain things we did. Just to say, yes, we did critical chain. But there's a lot that goes into getting a critical chain implementation invoked in a place where people didn't necessarily recognize the importance of just managing projects in the first place. Okay. We invited the contractors into the same meeting room, and we taught them network building the old way with post-it notes on the wall. And so they created templates. The project plans we created out of that process were, oh man, have you had that experience where you're taking people through a network building exercise and they're talking to each other for the first time? Like they didn't know each other? So you can kind of imagine what was going on there. Project plans end up being a little shorter than they were used to, or they claimed was possible. And they actually were agreeing to, let me use an example. Electricians and plumbers do not like to work in the same space at the same time. So if the network says, while we're doing this, we can do this, they'll be at different parts of the building doing it just so they don't have to see each other or listen to each other's radio. So we had to negotiate some, it's nice to know your neighbor, and he could actually help you move that heavy stuff you're trying to move by yourself too. Turns out working together didn't have as much downside as they imagined it did. Now I feel obligated because of the title to sort of touch on this capital budgeting thing, but I'm going to have to apologize again because A, I don't have enough time, and it's not a breakthrough, groundbreaking insight that I plan to share here. I just wanted enough people in this room. So they did annual capital budgeting in a spreadsheet. If I would just learn how to operate this thing. This is the actual 5-year budget plan on the wall. I had to take a picture. These things are projects here, and they're colored cells by month. So my project lasts this long. I need this amount of dollar each month. I tally that up in a cell, and that's my budget for this year. So far, so good? And then once the project starts, I'll build a Microsoft project plan, and I'll go execute it. But the real Microsoft project plan it's really a requirement that I build one, but then once it's done, I forget about it. Sounds familiar? So that's a problem we actually chose to fix instead of the capital budgeting problem. Do we need a better estimating process, or do we need a better execution process, was the question I posed to Doug, except I wasn't quite as polite. I found a more polite way to write it down than the actual conversation we had. Because I could have presented to him the traditional project management portfolio approach for how to come up with a budget for a portfolio. But I proposed that if we could just figure out how to get these projects done faster, then the problem itself would be better addressed. So he's still using the Excel spreadsheet for coming up with his budget.
It's not as bad much, though. Reduced.
Yes, the work required to maintain it has gone away. And instead, we decided to do multi-project critical chain. so we could try to build our way out of this problem. Now, they had a problem with, one of the things Doug was trying to explain to me is things change once I've nailed down the budget at the start of the year. 3 months into it, the set of projects they're asking me to do now is completely different from what we agreed to in the capital plan. It's as if it was a useless exercise. Now, what they're able to do is change in almost real time different scenarios in critical chain. And when they settle on a scenario they like, they can go back to the spreadsheet and just price that out. Does that make sense? Much of the complexity of the tools that are in place today is to try to keep track of the cost to all the different possible scenarios when you really only need the cost for the scenario you intend to implement. So that greatly simplified their need for software solutions, especially budgeting in their project management world. So there are some standard steps to go through when we're building a multi-project pipeline model. And they gone through all of these steps. All projects above a certain size included. Okay, so we had to make some decision about, do we do every request? And some of the requests are fairly small and quick turnaround. So did not warrant the time and effort to build them into the model. This is a quick snapshot we took at the time when we were baselining the model. I think Doug was almost beside himself with the way he was happy when he saw this. This is something I had in my mind that we could do. We should be able to do this, but I didn't know that software existed that actually allowed you to do this. I said, amen. Now you're happy we didn't show you how to do this with just budgets. This is also a screenshot from their pipeline. I got concerned, by the way, when I saw this. Does anybody have any concern about this particular pipeline? What do you suspect is going on here? They're not aggressive enough, right?
That's what we're working on.
I'm glad they came. At some point, I sound crazy, okay? So I need for them to hear it from other people. Thank you. You did not disappoint me. There's some good news and some bad news. Not everything went according to plan. There are still some unfunded projects that are popping into the pipeline. It's not causing as much chaos, but it's certainly causing his blood pressure to go up now that he actually knows it doesn't have to be like that. One of the things about we have this project advisory committee of executives in place, but we're in the phase still where they just look at the chart. They're still thinking that it's his chart. They haven't quite made the connection that they're the one, it was built for them. They think they're a passenger in this. So we're working to try to get them to take the wheels and drive themselves. This was a case study I wanted to explain, but I don't think we have enough time. We had the luxury of a control example where there was one project in their portfolio that did not agree to go on CCPM. It had already been started. It was a separate contractor team that was doing it. We went as far as to build a network for them, but they felt satisfied with the laminated project schedule they had created a year ago. Perfect, right? Anyway, there's more to that, and we can share some of the details. And my comment there is that we didn't have enough leverage at the time. And so one of the things that Doug is getting to understand is the importance of the owner exercising his right as an owner to say, you're going to do this. Okay? But the way contracts are done today, the expectation is that I've outsourced my risk, so I'll just sue him if he doesn't do it. Suing is a cost. You don't get something from it. So now you're hurt twice. The time it takes for you to punish him through the court system and the loss of revenue from that being up. They're up late by 6 months, at least 6 months.
They got up mid-February.
So,
but they weren't ready.
Right, I mean,
It wasn't complete, they got up in February and saw patients. So
Right.
it's Doctor Clinic is what it is, and you have patients in there.
And
Building's not bad.
the laminated contracted date was the beginning of September. We were talking to them in around March time frame, and they said, leave us alone, we're going to hit the date. Some things didn't go according to plan. We need to go back and work on the engineering side. The engineers were a little too smart for us. This may be needed in construction, but we know how to do projects. There's one thing we miscalculated that I think addresses this issue of, is the buffer size big enough? I'll leave you to come to your own conclusions, but let me just share with you what happened. We made some assumptions that the people using the rooms, the nurses and clinicians, will actually turn the rooms over to the facilities as requested per the schedule, so we could stay on schedule. The reality is when we got there, they had other plans for those rooms, and they weren't very polite in telling us about what they thought of our schedule. So we're working again at that advisory level to address the synchronization across the organization. Now this is another example that I would like to share with you, but would rather go to questions instead. Let me just give you a little hint. We went full circle and started to include lean concepts again, combined with critical chain. From a design standpoint, we need to use lean thinking in coming up with the scope of the construction project in the first place, because it doesn't matter if we're building the rooms fast. If we're building the wrong rooms, we're not really helping the situation. And so there was a neat tie in here that I can tell you again about that background later on. And we're not scoring so well in our own judgment in terms of hitting the future state we had designed for ourselves. But coming here is part of the injection to make sure we don't get stagnated, so that we can keep that process going. And with that, I will pause here for questions.
Two quick questions.
Thanks. Knowing the weather in North Dakota, does a 2-week schedule transition to a six-month schedule because of the weather? In other words, if I don't get the building enclosed or the foundations and stuff in there within a certain time period, does it then say, okay, we're done for 3 months or something like that?
That could happen. However, there's a nasty side of that story as well. And see Doug after, because
Okay.
he has actual examples of how they're coping with this.
Okay.
Don't buy one of those houses, by the way.
Okay. The second question is, since you've got your foot in the door and have some credibility, are you
Open question on the second part of that.
okay? Have you thought about looking at how the hospital is run as a medical institution, beyond just the infrastructure part of it?
Patience. Patience, my friend. Patience.
Thanks.
London is here.
Skip over.
Very simple. What's your current constraint to this process? Sorry, Hilbert.
Somebody have any other questions? I don't know. Any other questions?
I think I can maybe try to answer that a little bit.
Okay.
I think the current constraint we got is maybe administration right at this time. We don't have total buy-in from the administrative side. I mean, I'm the director of facilities, Jill's my architect. We're trying to push this concept uphill towards administration, towards the nursing directors, towards the floors. Some of them get it, and some of them don't. So we're having that struggle. We're trying to keep the wheels on this bus moving and overcome that resistance that they think this is a flavor of the month again. This is another. We have been through many different process improvement acronyms. You can name almost all of them, and we've been there. We've done that. They don't last. They're not sustained. You guys know that. The sustaining side is the tough part of this. we're making the attempt to keep this sustainable.